as the show progresses over 2.5 hours. I want to recap who you are, what we're talking about, what's happening, and why this is so important. Folks, I know when you hear about budget or money or taxes, you tune out, you're sick of it. It's been designed that way. You think government is bankrupt, in trouble. In truth, they are the most opulently rich and controlling class around. They are merged with private industry, and that's why the mainstream media won't even begin to talk about it. I want to briefly recap, Walter, exactly what we're dealing with here, and then I want to talk about the amazing solutions that you and others have and that will actually work.
Well, the bottom line is your listeners now know why Gorbachev went Democratic.
People think they're free and put a lot more weight on their back.
More money, more control.
And you talked about if the American people were a gerbil, what are we doing right now?
I always used to give the expression, the way the system works is they keep the chipmunk running on the treadmill, chasing the carrot. As through trickle-down economics, they provide just enough revenue to keep the chipmunk running at optimum proficiency as they tap off 80% of the energy produced.
And I also had my own little analogy, and I think I'm going to put an editorial on the website or maybe make T-shirts up of it, talking about the massive government, how big it is, what it controls, 70% of the market, 70% of the companies.
Alex, just one quick notation. I noticed 45% of the revenue is invested internationally. They get some of their best rates of return on the international companies. I went shopping for Christmas. Every item I picked up said made in China. You now know the reason for NAFTA, GATT, the whole 9 yards. The government funds are investing with the international corporations, producing the product at 10 cents on the dollar and selling it back at 40 cents on the dollar here in the States, accentuating their profits.
And we're talking about water districts, counties, cities, the states, the feds, Texas with a $435 billion surplus every year that keeps getting invested into the trillions, and they're telling you that they're broke, ladies and gentlemen. Walter, talk about how China and its 1.25 billion slaves fits into all of this.
China?
You were talking about the investments over there through the companies owned by the government.
I'm breaking it down. I just saw the composite government funds in their notes section. They usually authorize about 10% of the revenue invested with a group called the Asian Development Authority and 10% of the revenue invested with the African Development Authority. And if you look at a comprehensive annual financial report, especially on one of the investment pools or one of the large government pension funds, it breaks down exactly where the money is invested, who's holding what, and the dollar amount. Everyone should get a copy of their state retirement fund for the state employees. It breaks down where the money is invested. And they'll see the majority in international stocks versus U.S. stocks at this point in time. The growth factor is more for international.
In fact, a lot of retirees and folks out there saying, hey, leave it alone. The system may be corrupt, but it's my pension. Explain that you have giant surpluses out of the pensions that are being invested that they'll never see.
Arizona, the total actuarial liability for all state retirees and participants in the plan for being 100% funded, all active employees and retired, required $14.5 billion. The current fund balance is verging on over in excess of $32 billion. The employees will never see that money and never benefit from it. The Arizona legislature a couple of years ago, being that the employers, the cities, the counties, the school districts, and the employees were contributing to something where no way they should be contributing one dime, and in fact they should have been getting substantial refunds back, they passed their own internal statutes to make the pension fund strictly participatory, requiring a minimum of a 2.18% contribution from the employee and the employer. So the government employees are getting shafted in many cases also.
So recapping, Walter, again, using the example of the comprehensive annual financial report for, give me a close shot, guys. Thanks. I want to say the crew's doing a great job. For 1999, and then you look at 1998, $435 billion surplus Carol Keaton Rylander's own report right here, and you count all the counties. What is it, 100 of them in Texas?
Get your hands on 1996. In the notes section, it shows the transaction the state government made for local governments. They show $1.8 trillion in transactions for local government.
And that's nationwide.
No, that was the state of Texas.
State of Texas.
1.8 trillion.
Why? I've got some of the past years. This is the last one that's out, 99. Why are the reports getting smaller and smaller now that you've been exposing them? And how do we get that other information that they're now cutting out of them?
You have to look at a prior year's comprehensive annual financial report and see where certain areas all of a sudden get clipped or disappear in their entirety. And then you have a lead list to say what happened to these funds, where can I see the accounting?
And that's all because a successful commodities trader and financial advisor in New Jersey found out that the whole thing is a giant stinking fraud 10 years ago and started talking about it 3 years ago and made a documentary film and has done hundreds of radio interviews. Now, suddenly, I remember years ago, Walter, you could call and get one of these pretty quick. Sometimes they'll give the runaround. You have had a massive effect on others by talking about this ad. We need to keep pushing viewers. We're talking about budgets. We're talking about comprehensive annual financial reports. You're saying boring. Walter, recapping before we talk about the solutions. People that have just joined us, explain the difference between budget, and how that's drilled into our head, and the comprehensive annual financial report.
Well, the beautiful point...
Explain the fraud to people, why this is the biggest game in town.
The beautiful point here is that being that the government, for the last, since 1945, created this structure to take over the wealth, and they were successful. They have done it. So we're talking $60 trillion in composite liquid investment wealth held by federal and local governments. That's a phenomenal increase in 30 years. Now, on the composite government pension funds, they generated $4.3 trillion last year. Total taxation in this country in 1999 was approximately $3.6 trillion, federal and local governments. So composite government pension funds generated substantially over total forced taxation in this country. Now, can anyone see, with simple administrative action, restructuring composite government through consolidation of the surpluses into an annuity pension fund set up for the resident property owners and taxpayers, sale of venture and enterprise projects, which government now owns, which they shouldn't, like golf courses, amusement parks, real estate ventures.
Hotels.
Sell it back to the private sector where it belongs. That generates a phenomenal amount of revenue for consolidation and into the annuity pension fund. And where overgrowth took place, downsizing, because they're collecting the money to pay for that excessive growth. So with downsizing, that revenue becomes available for allocation into the annuity pension fund set up for the resident property.
Yeah, we're about to get to that. The solution is $60 trillion in investments and cream and private that just keeps rolling. They've got 70% of the stock market. That is governments, state, local, federal. They're militarizing the police against us, treating us like slaves, squeezing us, saying they need more when they basically already own everything. Even your mortgage is predominantly owned by government interest.
I like to use one example, Alex, which is very simple and very basic, but 100% true. If every one of your listeners had an 11 and 12-year-old boy, and they gave him carte blanche to write their own allowance check each week, and you made $1,200 a week, within no time, they'd be cutting a check for $1,000 a week. And if you told them you're going to cut them back to $800 a week, they'd kick, they'd scream, they'd holler, they'd use any logic available to them to justify how an 11 and 12-year-old boy could not survive on $800 a week. There is no difference here whatsoever. You just have bigger boys and sharper players.
But recapping for those that are just joining us, I know you've gone over this 1,000 times, Walter. The difference between the budget that we always hear about in the press and this big secret, the comprehensive annual financial report that all the media and everybody else, the corporations, know full well about because the government is their owners.
Well, the bottom line is the budget is strictly annual operating expenses, what they're going to spend for the year and what they're going to bring in for the year.
So all of the losses are there.
The expenses for operating government and what they're going to tally and tax the public to perform these functions.
And people think that the budget is the whole financial universe of government and private industry, but in truth, it is the comprehensive annual financial